Well, I'll let you guys know that I actually was going to shake things up a little bit today. And if you would like to, I have a very, very simple craft that kind of goes along with our lesson today. And all you need are some pieces of paper. So I have 3 pieces of paper, but you can do whatever you would like, number of pieces of paper will make do. And if you have some scissors, you can use scissors. But if you don't have scissors, just the 3 paper will be good. So let me start by sharing my PowerPoint here. So we invertebrates, and as you guys mentioned, um, these are things that do not have a backbone. Hopefully, when Josh joins, we'll be seeing some arthropods, which we'll talk about what those are. But we'll also be talking about some marine invertebrates as well, because there are all sorts of different types of invertebrates. So to give us a little overview, an invertebrate, like we said, animals without backbones, and there's actually a whole bunch of different groups. And we're going to go through a couple of those together. So we're going to talk today about worms, arthropods, cnidarians, echinoderms, mollusks, and sponges. And maybe some of those names you've heard of, and maybe some of those names might be a little newer to you. One of the simplest, I should say, is worms. And the name that we call worms is also annelid. And annelids are pretty simple structures. They have what we call a coelom, which is kind of like just their body cavity, a body wall, and just some simple segmented organs that go throughout their body. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about symmetry and how even though these animals may not have a backbone, they are still symmetrical in some ways and maybe not symmetrical. So to get us started with kind of what it means to be symmetrical, we'll pull out our piece of paper. And since worms are one of the simplest types of symmetry, they have what we call bilateral symmetry. And so simply our paper in half like this will give us something with bilateral symmetry. So we can think of this as pretty much a simple worm. Yeah, like a hot dog fold. So you can keep this. We're going to use this folded piece of paper in just a second when we get to some more complex animals. Mollusks. Mollusks are about one of the most common is a snail, but also octopus and cuttlefish and clams are all mollusks. So they have a shell, even though see the shell, like the octopus or the cuttlefish, they actually have an internal shell. They have a tongue called a radula, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And they have something called a foot. And I'll show you that in just a second as well. So let's go to this one. So this is actually the radula, which is their tongue. And that's pretty cool, the microscopic views of those, because you can see that they have like almost little tiny, teeny teeth that help them to eat. All right, so you might have saw on the previous screen. What kind of symmetry do you think the mollusks have? So they also have the bilateral symmetry, and I have one to show you. Does anybody know what this kind of is?
Charlotte and Isaiah say a conch shell.
Yeah, this is this is actually called a helmet conch because it kind of looks like a helmet. And even though it's kind of hard to tell, they have bilateral symmetry going this way. So it kind of splits down the middle like this, and they have a foot that comes out, and they can crawl along the ocean floor. So our mollusks, they create these shells. These are kind of part of their body, which is different from like um, a turtle. All right, I'm just checking to see if has Josh joined us yet. Looks like he Alex
Oh,
Burris.
yes, I'm double Alex Burris.
Yay!
Great.
So we talked about mollusks and we've talked about worms. So what Josh is going to talk to us a little bit about is arthropods. So arthropods don't just include insects; they also can include things like crabs, shrimp, different things like that. And so you can see it also has spiders, which are the arachnids. So these all have some different characteristics. But we're gonna. So insects have 6 legs, antenna, wings, compound eyes. So we can go back to our craft that we are working on. And if we were to make an insect, what do you think we should do with our scissors? We're gonna make 6 legs with this, and what we can do is we can keep our hot dog fold, and we can cut around. We're gonna make 3 legs because of the symmetry. That's gonna result in 6 legs total. And then we're gonna wanna add 1 antenna. I'll show you kind of what that, add 1 antenna, because that will result in 2. So now we have this kind of cut out like this pattern with 3 legs and an antenna. And then when we unfold it, we have something that resembles an insect with 6 legs and an antenna. So I'll kind of make this look a little bit more like an insect with that bilateral symmetry. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Josh to show us some insects and arthropods.
All right, everybody. So I am here in our Museum of Natural History in our Hall of Arthropods. So I'm not sure if you discussed this already, but let's talk about what that word arthropod means. Anybody know what that word means? Arthropod? What does arthropod mean? I'll get you started. Pod means foot or leg. Well, this is a beetle. Yeah, this is a rhinoceros beetle. Well, think about this. If somebody gets arthritis, that is an issue with their joints. So if arthro means joints and pod means leg, what do you think arthropod means? Jointed legs, yeah. So we were looking at a rhinoceros beetle that went out of use. So this is one of my favorite beetles. These are called taxicab beetles. So when we're talking about arthropods, there's a lot of members of arthropods, things that are jointed legs, and the largest group in arthropods are the insects, and the largest group of insects are the beetles. So beetles are an insect, so they would have 6 legs. What do you think is another characteristic of beetles? Yeah, kind of a big round body, definitely. And there's one more thing. It has to do with their wings. Oh, yeah, they sing in a band, definitely. It has to do with insects tend to have two sets of wings. And you can think about that with a butterfly. Um, what we think of as one wing is actually two pieces of wing. And in the case of beetles, one of their sets of wings is actually a hard shell to cover the softer set of wings. Think of how a ladybug flies. So the red and black part of a ladybug is actually one of its sets of wings that is hardened. All right, we're going to tour this room and see what we can find. We're going to go right up close here. You can see that is an insect larvae called a mealworm, and you can see the beetle of it in the back. Here's some crawling around there. So all insects as an invertebrate actually go through a form of metamorphosis. And we're going to look at this little graphic here. This will help us to explore metamorphosis. So this is probably the metamorphosis that you're used to. So what would come after the egg? When we're talking about insects, they start as an egg and then they would become larvae, or we would call that, in the case of a butterfly, what's that word? Caterpillar. Yeah, and then what comes next? After it's a caterpillar, it becomes a chrysalis. Excellent. Or we might call it a pupa. And then what's the last step in that? After a pupa? Yeah, it's an adult. So that's called complete metamorphosis. Let's look at the alternate path, incomplete metamorphosis. So this is what it is for things like grasshoppers or crickets. So they start as eggs, and then they're like a little version called a nymph. And then that nymph gets bigger, and then it becomes an adult. So about half of the insects go through complete metamorphosis, like a butterfly, and about half of them go through incomplete metamorphosis, like a grasshopper. All right, let's see what other insects are nice and visible. Well, this one isn't an insect, but it is an arthropod. And let's see the best view here. Maybe just like that, we have a desert tarantula. Everything's steamy in here today. So I'm trying to find you some good views without the condensation. While we're looking for various insects, I'm happy to answer some questions about our hall of insects or various insects. As you can imagine, insects have a lot of natural camouflage that helps them to hide.
Charlotte's wondering if caterpillars have legs.
Oh, do you know what? They're not true legs. So an insect doesn't get true legs unless it is in either the nymph stage or it is an adult. So they work kind of like legs, but they're more like the bristles on a worm than a leg. All right, it's a little rainy and wet in this exhibit, but we actually have...
Charlotte also wonders what kind of animal is a slug.
Ooh, a slug is a relative of snails, and it is a mollusk. And we actually call them gastropods, which means stomach foot, because their stomach and their is right on their feet. All right.
And May wonders if we'll see a butterfly, maybe.
I don't think we're going to see a butterfly today, but let's talk about the insect that we have right in front of us. Can anybody identify an insect in front of us? This is one of those master of camouflage insects.
I see it, I think.
It's right in the middle. You can see there's that big branch, and then it almost looks like it's coming off of that big branch, but it's behind it is a stick insect, or sometimes called walking stick. So it's right in front of us. Let me see it. This one's a little closer, but there we go. But there's raindrops in front of us. So this is a stick insect that we're looking at. And that part, it holds its front two legs out straight to look like a stick. And that's why you can only see four things coming off. But it is a true insect. See, there's some back there on that branch back there too. And right here up close on the glass, that's actually a baby stick insect. Two of them. So they use their body parts to camouflage and hide. You know what, maybe that's a better view. There's one on the very back wall. There we go. We can't, it's not blending in with anything because it's just on the wall. What do stick insects eat? Yeah, well, they're well suited for life in a tree. They eat leaves. So they're going to be up in the tree eating the leaves. They'll be on the branches anyways, so it all works out for them. All right, let me see if I can spot a couple more things before I head to a whole nother building and explore a different type of invertebrate with you.
What do the stick bugs eat?
Yeah, the stick bugs eat leaves.
Leaves, okay. And the zoo is called the Toledo Zoo, May, in Toledo, Ohio. Yeah,
Oh,
those stick bugs are cool. Ooh, not ooh.
these are assassin bugs. So these are pretty interesting insects. They actually have a really pointed nose, and instead of eating all of the body of the other insects that they eat, or sometimes they'll eat seeds, they actually just bore into them and kind of suck the juice out of it. So a little bit gross, but a little bit cool too.
Do they call those kissing beetles? Is that what they call them, Greg?
No, those are called, yeah, assassin bugs.
Yeah, aptly named.
All right, well, I'm trying to see if there's any other arthropod visible. Oh, yeah, here we go. So not an insect, but an arachnid. So arachnids are things like this tarantula, scorpions, daddy longlegs. Instead of 6 legs, how many legs do arachnids have?
Kids are saying
8
eight.
legs, yeah. And why is it hairy? Those are actually for 2 reasons. One, that's a defense. They can flick those hairs off, and they can be kind of like a little irritant if it would get in the eyes or nose of a predator. And then they also give it a little bit of a sense of touch with those hairs so they can help feel some movements around them. Any other questions? This is called a red knee tarantula, and you can see why, because it has that reddish color on its knees. All right, well, what I'm going to do is turn it back over to Alex, and I'm going to head over to our aquarium so we can look at some marine invertebrates. So I'll meet you over there.
All right, so far we've talked about three major groups: our worms, our annelids, our mollusks, like the snails and the gastropods, and our arthropods, which includes the insects and the arachnids, like the spiders. So all of the ones that we've talked about so far have had the bilateral symmetry. So that's if we imagine folding a piece of paper in half and unfolding it, you would have something that was the same on both sides. So I added some features to my bilateral arthropod to make it an insect, which is that specific group. So we said 6 legs, compound eyes, antenna. And one thing we didn't really talk about was the 3 body parts. Does anybody know the 3 body parts of an insect?
Yeah, they do. Head.
So the middle one starts with a T, and
Head,
the
body,
last
and
one,
abdomen, but there's
we're
enough
very
words.
close. Yeah,
Another
abdomen
word for body.
middle part is the thorax. Does that sound familiar to you guys? The thorax, yeah. So thorax and abdomen. All right, very good job. So let's talk about some of the next animals that Josh is going to show us. So we've discussed insects quite a bit. We're going to move to some other animals that of animal is a cnidarian. Maybe you've heard that word before. That's a pretty big word. Cnidarian is something like a jellyfish or a coral. So they have something called radial symmetry, and I'll show you that in just a second. But we do have an example of a cnidarian. Who knows what came from? Anybody know what animal this is from?
See you later. A brain coral?
It's a brain coral. Yeah, this is a type of coral called a brain coral. And this actually is not the animal, and we might have talked about this in a previous section. This isn't really the animal. This is the calcium shell that the animal makes to protect itself. But the animal itself is actually, it looks like a tiny little anemone, and it also has symmetry, or radial symmetry, and it has like little tentacles, and we call that a polyp. So we call that a coral polyp. And this is a coral. And the next type of animal that also has radial. So what are some animals that you see? What are the animals called? Well, the anemone was part of the cnidarians. What's this one with the, there we go, yeah, starfish or sea star. Yeah, so the starfish or the sea star is an echinoderm, and yeah, that's a urchin. And so I have an example of our starfish here. And so we'll probably get to see maybe some of these with Josh, depending on if they are out in the aquarium or not. But these have the little feet that go along the underside. And one of the interesting things I always have to say with the starfish is that they are predators. And the way that they hunt is they actually take their stomach out of their body and they digest things on the outside of their body, and then they bring their stomach back in. So their digestive system and all their organs are a little bit different than ours. So they actually have different body parts in each of their segments. So if we were going to make a thing like this with radial symmetry, we would actually need to make our piece of paper into a circle. So this isn't going to be the most perfect circle, but we'll cut out a circle here. Okay. And then for radial symmetry, you're just going to fold that circle in half, and then a half again, and then in half again, almost like you're making a little ice cream cone. And then you can whatever kind of cuts you want, like that. And then you unfold it, and you have something with radial symmetry, like when you make a snowflake. So this would not be a well, it could be a starfish, because there are starfish that have more than 5 legs, but it's a little unusual shaped. But this would be something that would have radial symmetry. All right, I'm going to tell you guys about one more animal, and then we will toss it back over to Josh and see if he's ready for us. So far we've talked about things that have bilateral symmetry. We've talked about things that have radial symmetry. Our last animal, is an animal that doesn't have any symmetry. So this is something called a sea sponge. So they're a very strange animal. They're one of the most primitive types of animals. They don't really have organs. They don't have very many tissues. They don't move. They stay attached to the thing. And they don't even really have a body cavity. So this is definitely one of the simplest animals. And they don't really have much symmetry at all either. So if we were going to make our paper into a sponge, what do you think I should do with this piece of paper? Well, one thing you could do is just use your scissors to cut any way you want, but the way I prefer to make this into a sponge is to crumble it up, and that's basically what a sponge would look like, some different types of pieces. So I have a few sponges here. I have this example of a sponge that you can see. It doesn't have a lot of symmetry. It does look a lot like a sponge. Here's another one. And then one that even more looks like a sponge that you might even have like in your house. So we don't have any living sponges at the aquarium that I know of, but these are some examples of sea sponges. So all of the animals we've talked about with radial symmetry and random symmetry live under the ocean. Let's go ahead and go to Josh and see if we can find some of those animals that we talked about.
Here in the aquarium now, looking at our ocean lab and some animals that are found there. And give me 1 minute. I'm going to connect this back to my keyboard for a second. All right, so we are looking at some of those animals that Alex was talking. And let's start with this one right here. Anybody have an idea what animal this one is? A sea star, yeah. And this sea star has a really kind of funny name. It's called a chocolate chip sea star. And it's called a chocolate chip sea star because, as you can imagine, it looks like it has chocolate chips on its body. So this is that radial symmetry in action. And this is one of those echinoderms. And like the name sounds, if you were to touch a sea star, it has kind of spiny, rough skin. I'm going to take this sea star and flip it over briefly. So all that bright purple that you're seeing are its tube feet. So it has a ton of tube feet, just suction cups, and that's what helps it to move through the ocean. And then right in the center, that is the mouth of the sea star. Now we tend to call this a sea star instead of a starfish, and the reason is because we want to differentiate them from fish. What questions can I answer for you about the sea star? Okay.
It's fascinating to watch what's happening in that tank.
So let's go to the relative of the sea star. So right below. Oh, some people have touched a sea star. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're definitely a unique feeling animal. All right. So a relative of the sea star, also with radial symmetry, is this animal directly below the meow. And this is a sea urchin. And this specific one is called a pencil urchin. So it's called the pencil urchin because it has those big spines. Most sea urchins have kind of thinner, sharp spines, but this one has kind of those big spines that help it to grab on and hold. So its spines are still for defense and protection, but more for holding on instead of being a direct defense. Any questions on it? Let me see if I can get that one closer to the camera a little bit. Yeah, both the sea star and this type of urchin have 5 sections that basically repeat that make it radial symmetry. So it goes the whole circle 360 degrees, and it's in segments of or 5 segments that mirror each other. All right, what about this large one here? What is this large invertebrate that we're looking at?
Charlotte says creepy.
Yeah, you might
Yeah.
consider it creepy.
Yeah.
This is a horseshoe crab. So the horseshoe crab is one of those animals that its name is not what it actually is. So a horseshoe crab is not a true type of crab. It got its name because it resembles some features of a crab, but they're actually much more distantly related to crabs than their name would imply. So looking at it, does this horseshoe crab have that bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry, or no symmetry at all? Oh yeah, it looks like a Roomba. Yeah, it kind of does.
Charlotte says bilateral.
Yeah, you're right. Bilateral. If we put a line right down the middle, right to its tail, both sides would look pretty much the same. We're gonna look at the legs of this, so you can see it has a lot of legs, and those legs each have pinchers on it to help that horseshoe crab to move around.
Aaron's concerned. Did you turn that sea star back over?
Oh, yep, you can see it's back over.
Yeah, thanks. We're glad they're concerned for the animals.
Yes, definitely. All right, and we have one more invertebrate to look at here. You might have through. It looks kind of like a walking shell, and this one I actually can lift out of the water. But if you look inside the shell, that is our striped hermit crab, and he might come out for us. Let's give it him a minute. So hermit crabs are a true crustacean, and they are an arthropod. And they have a soft abdomen, so they live in a shell to help protect them. So some crabs get a really tough, thick outer shell, but this one is a little bit softer. And as they grow bigger, they need to get a bigger shell. So they actually are using, this is a snail shell. So as a hermit crab grows, it needs to find a new shell. All right, we're going to put him back in the water. All right, and I'm going to go to one larger exhibit so we can look at a larger crab species. So just right next door, we're going through a kelp forest here. This is actually the largest type of arthropod in the world. These are called Japanese giant spider crabs. And this one looks modestly sized. Let me see if this one on the wall, there's a little glare, but you can get an idea. When they have their legs spread out and they are full grown, it can be a 6-foot span between tip of one leg to tip of the other. That is a huge crab.
Yeah, that's a huge crab. Rael would like to know, do people eat them?
Good. I don't believe that they're a common eating. They are a deep ocean crab. So I don't think that they're as common for food as some other types of crabs, but I'm not certain. I see, yeah, like on octonauts, yeah, a lot of our animals that we have are featured on octonauts, definitely.
And May wants to know what your favorite maybe animal that we've spoken about today is.
Boy, that's a tough call. I do like invertebrates quite a bit. I might say this one. The spider crabs are pretty interesting, but I also really like sea stars too. All right. Do you know what? Let me see if I can get us. We have not looked at a representative of the Cnidarians yet. So we can look at one of those. If you've been on an earlier session with us in the aquarium, you've actually seen this tank before. So this is our anemones and the friend of the anemones, the clownfish. So these are in that Cnidaria group, or the stinging cells, along with coral and all different types of jellies or jellyfish. And yes, everybody say hello to Nemo and his dad, Marlin.
Do you have jellyfish at the zoo, Josh?
We do. Do you know if we have time? Do we have more time?
If you have jellyfish.
Yeah, let me walk around and we can.
Do you guys want to see the jellyfish?
So the type of jelly I'm going to be able to show you is called a sea nettle.
Because our boys and girls love jellyfish. They're obsessed with, oops.
They especially love box jellyfish.
All right, here we go. These are sea nettles. So also in that Cnidaria group, they're comprised of the bell, the big part, more by the current than their own motion. And then they have the stinging cells trailing behind them. So one thing that's pretty interesting, they're not a super complex animal in terms of their build, but they can be very long-lived. And these are predators. They are hunting. The stinging cells help them to catch of as hunter.
And Josh, no one's asked this question. We've had a little bit of learning about jellyfish, but Charlotte and Isaiah are asking, why do people say to pee on a jellyfish sting? And sorry if that's a gross question, but it is a good question.
Yeah, it actually has to do with the ammonia. So pee actually has ammonia in it, and that helps to neutralize the reaction that's going on from the sting of a jelly. So and it does work. All right, do you know what? Since I'm on this side, we can look at a couple more invertebrates. We have, I'm going to see, this is a, can you see? This is our giant Pacific octopus.
There's a little bit of glare and it's a bit fuzzy. So are you able to, oh my goodness, are you able to keep the iPad quite still? Because he's really active now.
That we have is that this is a dark tank, so we can see him, but that never translates focus as possible. So yeah, he's moving around. So this is a type of mollusk, just like snails and the slug that we talked about. And this type of mollusk is a cephalopod. All those other pods, what do you think cephalopod would mean? Yeah, well, cephalopod means the head. Cephala is head. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Alex to close out our invertebrate session.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming along with us. I know the video was a little fuzzy there at the end, but hopefully you got to see all the different invertebrates. And if you were able to follow along with the craft a little bit, we'd love to see your bilateral symmetry, your radial symmetry, and your no symmetry animals. And yes, Charlotte, there are many invertebrates that are in danger. There's lots of insects, and the thing about insects and invertebrates, there's so many of them that we haven't discovered yet. There may be species that become endangered that we haven't even discovered yet. So they are the most frequent type of animal in the world as far as invertebrates go.